Good afternoon. Sorry, what is it? Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. What a day. Um, my name is Anna Sternsches. I'm a director of Anti Annenbaum Center for Jewish Studies, and I'm here to introduce our wonderful keynote speaker. But I would like to say first a few words about the organizers of our wonderful conference and about you, presenters of it. So I would like to start with Jacob Herman and Marissa Herzog, two organizers of this annual Schwartz-Reisman Graduate Student Conference in Jewish Studies. I mean, you have done a fantastic job, brought in students together, presented a slice of what the future of Jewish studies will look like, and also showed the place of University of Toronto in that future. And I want to say, like, this conference is such a difficult thing to put together because, well, our grad students have to present. They want to present when they want to present. They have topics which they're not changing for this conference. And yet it's up to organizers to come up with a theme, with the ways to kind of make these topics interesting and exciting for the audience. And it is a very, very difficult task. So I want to say thank you, congratulations. And nobody would have guessed that this is just a conference of papers that were ready for this moment. You made it feel like we were really getting insights in the future of Jewish studies. So thank you for that. And, I also want to say, like I sat through every paper and listened to all presenters. And for me personally, it was a beautiful day. So many presenters and chairs, and of course, the organizers are my students. I supervise their work or sit on their committee. And it is a special joy to see your chapters, your insights, your, I don't know, struggles for which I'm intimately familiar to actually come out into the world, come out into the real world of public discourse, into scholarship, and not just the presentations, but also questions, the discussion in the coffee room, and see your growth, to see your growth as scholars. And it is a privilege that neither I nor my colleagues take for granted any second. So speaking of my colleagues, Professor Bergen, who was the grad director here for over 10 years, Doris, I was trying to count how many. I came out with 10 and then the fingers ran out. So Professor Tracy Limouche, and of course, Professor Naomi Zeidman, who was a grad director in the past few years, sending her remarks. Like, we're sitting here and thinking about what it takes to build this grad program. And I want to thank Doris, I want to thank Tracy and Naomi for running this event, for running this program, and for making sure that Center for Jewish Studies is the place for our graduate students where we see Jewish studies will grow. And thank you for your work, and thank you for the opportunity to build it with you. Now, many presentations and questions today address the current moment as the context or even catalyst of your research. And I would like to emphasize that no matter how much is happening in the world, how much we worry about things like academic freedom, about restrictions on our way, about the future, and the topic of fear, it was interesting to me, came so much today in various contexts of your presentation. But one topic that didn't come out as much, and I want to bring it up, is the topic of joy and privilege of being able to do research in Jewish studies. This field was not always allowed or even legal in universities, and now that it is, and it is so generously supported, I'm excited that you, our students, are taking full advantage of these opportunities. Now, this work would not be possible without the support of our center, and I would like to thank Constance Chan. Please give Constance a separate round of applause. I cannot even begin to describe all the things that Constance does to make this event run. You see her operating with this equipment, which, by the way, nobody else can operate. But there are also so many other things that range from creating the program, helping, from like things like creating the actual physical program to inviting speakers, make sure everyone comes here, that make sure the lights are on, the snacks are there, the equipment works. So these things are crucial for making student success, and center staff are, as you know, at front and center. I have to say it twice, and all this, and of course, Galina Weissman, who just left, and Natasha Rikiki-Fried. And also our amazing work study students team, Katie Jones, Yael Tarasovsky, Mikhail Klasen-Kay, Ilya Pugachev, and Yotam Sheflan. If I forgot someone, please wave. And if I didn't, please clap for those students. And now, of course, I am delighted to introduce, sorry, Dorota, it took me forever to get to the point, but I can't speak concisely. So now I'm very excited to introduce our keynote, Professor Dorota Glowacka, who teaches at the University of King's College. And also for Professor Glowacka, this is also a sort of a homecoming because Jacob Herman was her undergraduate student, and we just spoke about what it takes, like how Dorota is looking for these excellent students that she teaches and send them to us. We're very grateful. Keep them coming. And I know it is a special pleasure to see your undergraduate students grow into grad students and then later becoming scholars in the field. So Professor Glowacka has her PhD in comparative literature from State University of New York at Buffalo. She has taught critical theory, Holocaust and genocide studies, theories of gender and race in the contemporary studies program since 1995. She also lectures in the foundation year program at the Dalhousie and at Dalhousie University, where she has been first cross appointment to the graduate faculties of English, Gender and Women's Studies, European Studies, and Interdisciplinary Studies. Tired of saying studies, so many interdisciplinary work. She's an author of numerous publications and books. I'm only reading to you some and only those that are in English. So I will name her monograph called Disappearing Traces, Holocaust Testimonials, Ethics and Aesthetics, which came out of Washington University Press. She's also an author of, she's also co-edited 2 volumes called Between Ethics and Aesthetics, Crossing the Boundaries with Stephen Booth, which came out from SUNY University Press. A volume called Imaginary Neighbors, Mediating Polish-Jewish Relations After the Holocaust, and many, many others. Lots of articles. Tried to read one in Polish, read the title, failed and decided to just let you speak. So please welcome Professor Glowacka, who will deliver a keynote talk at the Schwartz-Reisman conference. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for this generous introduction. And it's just such an honor, but also such joy for me to be here, as you said. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful to the Center for Jewish Studies for inviting me here. And I'm joyous for so many different reasons. But I need to talk, so I can't enumerate all of them. And thank you for everyone who has made this conference possible. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Marissa. And truly, it's just so selfishly rewarding when your students go off into the world and do these great things. So thank you. I've learned so much today from all of you, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm also honored to be presenting here today on the traditional Huron-Wendat, Seneca, and the Mississauga of the Credits territory. And this is very important to me as a scholar who is coming here from Mi'kmaq, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. But I'm also an immigrant to Canada, and that is very important to me to offer this territorial acknowledgement. My talk, maybe I just say regarding being an immigrant, you can hear it in my accent, which will probably grow thicker and thicker as I start like reading these quotes in Polish. This is inevitable. And my title is a mouthful, hidden in translation, the gendered politics of translating Polish language Holocaust diaries written by youth into English. So I'm just really delighted to throw in some Polish and some Polishness into the mix here. I will begin with a quote from one of the diaries. So on April 7th, 1943, and that's only 1 week before the final entry in his diary from the Łódź ghetto, Dawid Sierakowiak notes, the translation of Lenin, and he's translating from Yiddish into Polish, is proceeding quickly. I would modify the translation because it's a kind of colloquial expression. He says something like, is moving forward briskly, and he's being facetious. So David is multilingual in Polish, Yiddish, Hebrew, Russian. He's fluent in English, French, Latin, and German, and he's learning Esperanto, and he's 18 years old at that time. He translates various texts from one language to another. He writes poetry, political pamphlets, philosophical treatises, and he's suffering from hunger, diseases, extreme fatigue. He will unfortunately die shortly after. But a very different picture of the Łódź ghetto multilingualism emerges from another diary, the diary by Rivka Lipschitz. And Rivka is a girl from an Orthodox Jewish family, and her education in the Polish language school ended when she was only 10 years old. So unlike Polish-speaking Sierakowiak, Yiddish is Lipschitz's mama loshen, and she yearned to master Hebrew, but she only has rudimentary knowledge of Hebrew. And Polish is her written language. She can't really write in Yiddish. So throughout the diary, she expresses this frustration with this inadequacy to express her deepest feelings in Polish. I just read this one quote when she says, Shalom Aleichem, it's what you sing on Friday before Kiddush. It doesn't sound good in Polish, but she really writes, oh, it sounds so stupid in Polish, right? So it's just kind of linguistic anguish that she's expressing. So just to kind of begin with those entries, I think that they both allow us a glimpse into this kind of intricate mapping of the language politics in the Łódź ghetto. And I also say gendered language politics, which is suffused with these turbulent translatory exchanges. So for Sierakowiak, translation is life-sustaining, and it is a burden for Lipschitz. So they are very different, but I'd argue that both of these diary writers already gesture toward the complexities that many decades later will surround the translations into other languages, especially into English, which is this lingua franca of Holocaust remembrance. So in the book Witness Between Languages, the translation of Holocaust testimonies in context, my colleague Peter Davis writes, without translation, there would be no Holocaust. By which he means that insofar as the Holocaust is the English language construct, the concept itself, he writes, depends on translation and could not exist without it. But despite the centrality of translation during the Holocaust and in the study of the Holocaust, truly relatively little attention has been given to the problem of translation in the texts that have emerged from the Holocaust, with notable exceptions. And I'm not going to talk about Elie Wiesel's and the world became silent, because I think that's a known case of Wiesel, having the work translated first into French as La Nuit, then twice into English, and so forth. Another well-known kind of debate around translation is around Tadeusz Borowski's This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen. It's a seminal collection of short stories loosely based on Borowski's experiences as a prisoner, a Polish prisoner in Auschwitz. First published in Poland in 1951, appeared in English in 1967. Some of you are probably familiar. It's always anthologized. And in 2018, it was retranslated by Madeleine Levine as Here in Our Auschwitz and Other Stories. And it's really interesting to compare the two. Because the new translation reveals these striking omissions in the first one, like entire passages are skipped, the word choice is different, proper names are skipped, and so forth. And generally speaking, these omissions contribute to the transformation of what is kind of quintessentially Polish account of the Nazi camps into a universalizing message. So in this talk, I'd like to address this like politics of translating these Polish language texts, in this case, Holocaust Diaries, into English. And the works I talk about, they were significant memorial projects in Poland, but then they have become popularized in North America via translation. And the process of these diaries transformations into Holocaust literature, truly, is a very long process. It starts with the kind of transcription from the manuscript, publication in the original language, and then translation and proliferation in translation, and so forth and so forth. So there are many stages to that. So I just want to mention Walter Benjamin, a German Jewish thinker, who asserts that translation allows the work to flourish in the afterlife. So translation, Übersetzen, allows for the afterlife of the work, Überleben. So I will focus on four diaries by Dawid Sierakowiak, Rutka Laskier, Rywka Lipszyc, and Melania Weissenberg, Molly Applebaum. And there are many diaries written by youth in Polish, and some have already become part of the Holocaust canon, such as the diary of Dawid Rubinowicz. The youngest author I have encountered so far is Jerzyk Felix Urman. Jerzyk Urman was 11 years old when he took his life, when the family was in hiding on the Aryan side and the apartment was raided. So that's the youngest diarist that I am aware of. And I want to consider the factors that precipitated the translation of these particular diaries, but perhaps not others. And I want to draw attention to the differences in historical, discursive, and gendered context occupied by the original text and their English language translations. And in most cases, they are amplified by the unique circumstances of these diaries emerging from lostness into fame. So I want to trace the role of translation in entrenching existing national memorial paradigms in Central and Eastern Europe on one hand and in North America on the other. And then compare these trajectories of translation in the broader context of Holocaust memory, politics and culture wars and global circuits of post-memorial exchange. But I also want to ask what's gained in translation. That's Susan Bassnett's term. So I want to postulate that translation has this potential for complicating stagnant historical narratives, and it can contribute to the emergence of new ones that are informed by integrated, multidirectional, and decolonial modes of remembering the past. And I'm interested in the dynamic of gender as they intersect with the politics of translation. And they are the dynamic of gender are at play in the diaries themselves. However, the dominant conceptions of gender have also shaped the reception on both sides of the Atlantic. And the text by May diarists, I just have a few here: Czerniakow, Korczak, Kaplan, Tory, Zelkowicz, Kruk, Gradowski, Ringelbaum, and many, many others. These are the ones that have become reliable sources of historical knowledge. But it was the translation into English of a diary by a young female writer that first, okay, it's a cliche, but I show that first propelled the Holocaust into the realm of popular culture in the 1950s. And it is primarily the diaries of young women such as Ruth Kalaskier and Rivka Lipschitz that more recently have become global cultural phenomena. And diaries occupy a liminal space between literary artifacts and historical record. And I think it's perhaps that sui generis nature of the diaries that makes these texts particularly compelling as voices from the past. And it's particularly true of the diaries written by youth. I'd say that amidst the anxiety about losing the voice of the survivors, the living voice of the survivors, these young authors have become as if the surrogates, kind of anachronistically the heirs to the survivors that are passing away, an inverted figure of transgenerational transmission of memory. So they provide a valuable lens through which to explore the concept of the way that Holocaust literature has emerged across these very different cultural contexts, and also into how that translation functioned as both the instruments of memory wars, but also as agents of global cultural exchange. And in contrast to adult Holocaust writers whom I mentioned, these young diarists are always referred to in interpretation of the works as by their first names, like Rivka, Rutka, David. So that underscores this intimacy and familiarity of the voices and the closeness to contemporary audiences, which makes them this perfect conduit of vicarious memory transmission. So it is a very weighted and very fragile post-memorial milieu that the diaries I will talk about have been discovered. Or in the case of Dawid Sierakowiak and another one I quickly mentioned, Mary Berg, have been rediscovered. And another moment in comparison to diaries written by adults, in the diaries written by the youth, you don't really see this kind of documentary imperative. I know we will be there no longer. I really have to document what happened. That is relatively absent in the diaries written by youth. And that is especially true in the diaries written by young females. They often dwell on a therapeutic aspect of diary writing, even life-giving function of the diary. They highlight the mise en scène of writing the diary, the scarcity of material, the hardships of finding time and private space to write as they increasingly suffer from illness and cold and hunger. So you can say that in contemporary contexts, there is this artifice of the diary as the authentic voice from the past. So no wonder that the language of the diary has to be fashioned as a transparent medium. Therefore, if it channels its author's posthumous message, and the diaries are proofs of the young writer's existence, then the scene of translation has to be erased, right? The scene of mediation has to be erased. And it is no coincidence that even the name of the translators are very often unmentioned in these books. But it is the diaries translations into English that have fostered the transformation of these unique historical documents, predominantly private records not meant for anyone's eyes, into youth diaries that have not meant for anyone's eyes, into literature. But what also happens is that these young diary writers therefore become authors, right? And maybe it's not a coincidence that not unlike Anne Frank, all of these diarists aspired to become writers. The dream which kind of has been fulfilled decades later through their English language publications. But there are also strange translatory twists, and in some instances, Polish language diaries were first published in English and only then in their original Polish. So they returned to the sites of memory in Poland, refracted through the prior reception in English. And that was the case with Rivka Lipschitz and others like Clara Kramer. I mentioned her later. And I just want to mention one really interesting case of the diary of Mary Berg, born Miriam Wattenberg. She typed these notes kind of in shorthand in the Warsaw Ghetto. And then she arrived in the United States already in March 1944. And she rewrote them in Polish very quickly. And then a man, journalist Shmuel Schneiderman, who greeted her in the harbor of New York, translated these notes into Yiddish. So that diary was first published in Yiddish in a Yiddish journal in New York. Then Schneiderman had it translated into English from Polish, published it in 1945 as Warsaw Ghetto, a diary, and that was one of the first eyewitness accounts from the Warsaw Ghetto to appear in English. There were some attempts to publish it in Poland for many reasons. They were unsuccessful. And then Berg's original notes and the Polish manuscript disappeared. So when the book finally appeared in Poland in 1983, then it was reissued in 2021. It had to be translated into Polish from English. Right? So it translated into English into Polish, into Mary Berg's native tongue. But there is a twist, because in the Warsaw Ghetto, Berg's mother was protected by an American passport, and they were also part of the ghetto elite. So especially within the kind of context of Polish war narratives, her story evoked the odium of collaboration. So I would say that linguistic distancing was quite fortuitous. And just another thing I mentioned before I jump into looking at the diaries, I kind of feel like this inverted linguistic trajectory also parallels the fates of such well-known memoirs as Ida Fink's Skrawek Czasu, Scrap of Time, and Henryk Grinberg's Żydowska Wojna, The Jewish War. So they both first gained recognition abroad, and only decades later, on the wave of public reckoning with the dark pages of history in Poland, they were welcomed in Poland. So just very quickly, the kind of belated reception in Poland had been mediated by these successful translations into English. In Fink's case, first in Hebrew and then into English. And another point, maybe very quickly, that the diary's translation into English in a way creates this anachronistic illusion that being read in the context of North American Holocaust memorialization was this text's destiny. And this effect, in my view, is underscored by the book covers. Very often, the English text imprints itself on this facsimile of the Polish language text, as you can see, rendering the Polish text illegible. And it's even more spurious, you can say, in the case of the diary of Dawid Sierakowiak, where this kind of lettering in the diary of David Sierakowiak is made to resemble his actual calligraphy in Polish. And so it's a kind of simulacrum of Dawid Sierakowiak's Polish handwriting. So the fact that many Holocaust youth diaries were written in Polish rather than in Yiddish, which was the language of the majority of Polish Jews, is also interesting, and it reflects the complexity of Jewish life in Poland, but also a generational shift. I mean, for youth diaries in this interbellum period, and perhaps. Also, the prevalence of the Polish language in the diaries may be indicative of the gender dynamic of assimilation, since the girls from Orthodox Jewish homes would have attended Polish language schools while the brothers studied in yeshivas. So there is just like a lot of complexity to that. And with that, I will now introduce us to Dawid Sierakowiak. I spent so much time with these diaries, like they are my friends in a very strange way, and it's very difficult to part with them at the end of the book. Sierakowiak was born in 1924 in Łódź to a working class family, but he was very talented. He received a scholarship to a prestigious Jewish gymnasium. David, his sister Nadia, Natalia, the parents Mailech and Sura Sherakowiak were probably relocated to the ghetto in May 1940. Sherakowiak wrote his diary daily from June 28, 1939, so shortly before the war, to April 15, 1942. And it offers a really unique glimpse into the lives of secular Jewish youth in the ghetto, the struggle to preserve a sense of self among this collapse of social order, mounting deportations, death of their friends and family from hunger and exhaustion. And his insights into the dynamic of this unfolding catastrophe of the Wood Jews are remarkable. There are plenty of quotes. I just read a few. He says on May 20th, 1942, "We are not considered human at all, just cattle for work and slaughter." Increasingly, he is becoming aware of his deteriorating health. It's really peculiar to read the entries where he is so aware of his embodied self. And this is this young philosopher, intellectual, being sort of pressed into the reality of his diseased body. So hunger takes the center stage in the diary, and he notes, that's one of my favorite quotes. He says, "I read, but I can hardly learn anything." He's exhausted. "Only a few English words. Among other things, I'm now reading excerpts from Schopenhauer's works. Philosophy and hunger, quite a combination," he says. And initially, he's very active in a Jewish communist organization, maintains frequent contacts with his comrades, but he's increasingly withdrawing from all of these activities, and he comes up with this like survival philosophy of life. And he says, to eat, think, study, write, and work, just to get to the end. His reflections on the collapse of his family life are heart-wrenching. I just read maybe one quote. His father failed disastrously in his parental duties. Here on April 5, 44, he says, "Father took bread away from me. He has quite a nature. I felt ashamed before Schopenhauer's spirit." And his beloved mother, he's very close with his mother. His beloved mother is deported to the Chełmno killing center during Allgemeine Gesperre, Wielka Szpera, in September 1942. And David is crushed and he's in despair. And he writes, "My most sacred, beloved, worn out, blessed, cherished mother has fallen victim to the bloodthirsty German Nazi beast," with 3 exclamation points, and so forth. Not to take away anything from that emotional, expression, I find it really peculiar because this expression, the bloodthirsty German Nazi beast, which in Polish is krwiożerca bestia germańskiego hitleryzmu. This is distinctly a Soviet slogan, something that you would find in Soviet propaganda. So it's quite interesting to find it in this passage. And he's also really critical of the Jewish Council and of Chaim Rumkowski, and he accuses him of megalomania and stealing and so forth. David Sherakowiak died from most likely tuberculosis on August 8, 1947. And this is his Abmeldung card, which I don't know how to translate into English. That means he no longer lived under that address. And if you look closely, the cause of death is mentioned as lung disease. He was buried at the Jewish cemetery on Bratska Street. After the war, his diaries were found by a Polish man in the apartment in which Sherakowiak's family had lived in the ghetto, and they were lying on a stove, kind of crumpled pile of papers, and they were most likely used for fuel. So we lost a few notebooks. 2 notebooks appeared in 1960 in the Jewish Historical Bulletin, followed by a publication of those 2 notebooks as books. And then there was no interest in them whatsoever. And in some very unclear circumstances, 3 other notebooks surfaced in Poland in 1960s. If you are familiar with the 1960s in Poland, this is a wave of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic violence. And in those circumstances, those 3 notebooks were spirited out of Poland. And eventually in 1996, they were deposited at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And in 1996, the first English edition, you already saw the cover, appeared in New York. And this edition contains all 5 notebooks. So they borrowed the 2 notebooks that are still at the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, and they produced this 5 notebook edition. The editors of the English edition explained in the preface that they decided to publish the diary in English because their efforts to publish them in Poland, I quote, were defeated by politics and anti-Semitism. And that message was underscored by the epigraph that they added. The epigraph was from Czesław Miłosz's poem, Campo dei Fiori, in which the Polish poet describes the indifference of Poles who are passing by the walls of the burning ghetto. So, as I said, 1996, donated to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the first Polish language edition, which you have here, that does not appear until 2015. And it was largely based on the English language publication. Right? So it contained a lot of factual errors. The Sierakowiak's writing style was corrected to resemble contemporary Polish. The entire passages were omitted, even entire entries, and some, especially those that referred to Sierakowiak's communist leanings, were underplayed. And then a year later, in 2016, the diary is published once again in Poland, so just within this 1 year, right? And it is a response by the scholars at the Jewish Historical Institute to what they thought was a kind of Baudelarized version of the diary. So we have 2 diaries, one by one, and with the principle of fidelity to the original manuscript. So just to kind of sum it up quickly, in my view, the translation of Sierakowiak's diary into English, along with the publication of these 2 competing Polish editions, is emblematic of a broader dispute over whether the diary belongs to the North American canon of Holocaust literature, which tends to universalize its message, or whether it's primarily a historical record of the experiences of Polish Jews during the Holocaust, now in need of being rescued from this homogenizing effect of globalized Holocaust memory. I will now introduce you to Rivka Lipschitz. Born in 1939, I'm sorry, that's supposed to be 29. I looked at this slide so many times, of course, 29, in an Orthodox Jewish family, and it's connected to a long lineage of Łódź rabbis. We are not quite sure when the Lipschitz family moved to the ghetto, and here you have her Anmeldung registration card, October 10, I believe it's October 10, 1941. It's after her father died following a brutal beating by the Germans. Her mother passed a year later. So when she starts writing the diary, she lives with her 2 younger siblings. The youngest siblings were deported to Chełmno during the same action that engulfed Sierakowiak's mother. And she lives with her sister, Tsipka, and her cousins. And Lipschitz is despondent. And there are many such passages in the diary. I will just read one, November 24, 1943. I don't have any time to write. I'm sick of my entire life, those never-ending grudges of my cousins. Besides, there is no Bayrat anymore. Oh, dear God, when is it going to end? I don't want to live at all. I have just thought, what a pity that Jews are not allowed to kill themselves. It seems that you mustn't even think about it. I can't stand it anymore. I'm writing these words standing at the small table. That's why I'm scribbling so much. It seems to me that I'm not showing my feelings, maybe a little, because I really will go crazy. I don't have time and so forth. Sometimes you don't see it, of course, in the published version, but sometimes you would use like 10 or even 20 ellipses. Right? So it's just kind of emotional state is being expressed. I could take 2 hours just unpacking this quote. There are many syntactical and semantic errors that really show her struggle with the Polish language, and of course it disappears in translation. Yeah, so. In August 1944, Lipschitz, her sister, her 3 older cousins were deported to Auschwitz, and Zipka was murdered on arrival. Lipschitz and her cousins were transferred to Christianstadt labor camp, then to Bergen-Belsen, where they were liberated in April 45. And these are the last traces of Lipschitz as being alive on the hospital list in Niendorf Hospital in Germany. That's the one below. Sorry, it's so small. And above is a signed displaced persons registration camp. Lipschitz's fate remains unknown, but most likely she died shortly after. Her diary was found not far from the ruins of Crematorium 3 in Auschwitz-Birkenau in June 45 by a Soviet army doctor, Zinaida Berezovskaya. And she died in 1995. Her grandfather returned to Moscow. I'm sorry, I'm speaking too quickly. Her granddaughter returned to Moscow from San Francisco, and she found the diary in this envelope with a note that it had been found in Auschwitz. So the granddaughter of Berezovskaya contacted Judith Janetz, a Holocaust archivist in San Francisco, who in turn invited Ewa Wiatr, a Polish scholar and historian of the Łódź ghetto, to help with the transcription of the diary. And Ewa Wiatr managed to identify the author and to find Rivka Lipschitz. And then Wiatr and Janetz went kind of on this quest to establish the fate of Rivka Lipschitz. They really wanted to write that last chapter of her life. And they traveled to Poland, Germany, Israel, but the search was futile. However, the 2 researchers became best friends, and they were sort of bonded in this quest to add that missing chapter. The diary today is at Yad Vashem. The diary was first published in English in 2014 as the Diary of Rivka Lipschitz, then republished in a smaller format. First appeared in Poland in 2017 as Dziennik z Getta Łódzkiego. Compared with the Polish version, most of the English language entries in Lipschitz's diary are shortened and some are omitted altogether. I just mentioned one that really struck me as interesting. And these are the 2 entries on October 5th and October 7th that are like excised from the English translation altogether. And in both of them, Lipschitz explores sensations of sexual arousal during 2 different encounters with men. And in the first one, a man embraces her while they are descending an unlit staircase. And she says that she had these dziwne uczucia, strange feelings. And in the second one, they are in the municipal baths and she notices a man looking at her and her cheeks are flushed and she thinks that perhaps he liked me, he says, może mu się podobałam. So maybe one of the reasons why Lipschitz started keeping a diary was the need to comprehend these strange feelings, even though she may have lacked the words to express them. But the deletion of these passages in the English language edition, reminiscent of the censoring of Anne Frank's diary, strips the text of its sensual dimension, but it also allows for a more uniform presentation of Lipschitz as a devout religious girl. And Lipschitz was also infatuated with her older friend Surcia. And in her diaries, she copied the letters to her older friend and she professed her love. But with the references to Lipschitz's awareness of her awakening sexuality excised from the diary, these homoerotic undertones of these confessions of love are difficult to discern. But what also disappears in translation are Lipschitz's struggles to write in Polish, and these frequent mistakes in grammar, word choice, punctuation, syntax. But it is these linguistic stumbles that are distinct markers of her social and cultural location, and they convey her passionate, anguished desire to express herself. So, published in Poland in 2017, and soon after, Galicia Museum in Kraków organized a highly successful bilingual exhibition, The Girl in the Diary, Searching for Rivka from the Łódź Ghetto, and that's where I first met her. It was accompanied by like a multitude of cultural events, readings with high school students, scholarly panels, and so forth. The way I read these endeavors, and many others, there are these impassioned excavations of the stories of murdered Polish Jews by young Polish intellectuals. I see them as political interventions, part of cultural resistance to the ethno-nationalist ideology of the Polish ultra-conservative Law and Justice Party. And the historical context of this diary soaring into popularity was the backlash that followed the introduction of the Polish government in February 2018 of an amendment to the Act on the Institute of National Remembrance, so-called Holocaust law. And it criminalized public speech that attributed co-responsibility for the crimes committed by the Third Reich to the Polish nation. So the context matters. And in the meantime, in North America, The Girl in the Diary became a really successful traveling exhibit throughout Jewish cultural centers and Holocaust museums. And Rivka led numerous workshops for young people, and they were encouraged to put themselves in her shoes. And I'm quoting from the website of the Milwaukee Holocaust Museum. I still have a few pages left. Is that okay? This is my third friend. It's Dorota Glowacka. Born in Kraków in 1929, well-to-do assimilated family. They moved to Będzin in 1940, where an open ghetto was established shortly after their arrival. The diary starts on January 19, 1943, last entry April 24, 1943, and that's shortly before the family was forced to move to the closed ghetto. In August 1943, Yakov and Dwojra Laskier with their two children, Rutka and Heniusz, were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where, according to an eyewitness, Laskier succumbed to cholera 6 months later. Yakov Laskier was the only surviving family member, settled in Israel after the war, started a new family. This is a very interesting diary to read. Most of the entries focus on her social adventures. She writes about jealousies among friends and crushes on boys, especially Janek. Has the kind of, she really, really likes him, but she wouldn't let him kiss her. And so she longs for that first kiss, and she explores her sexuality, and she self-consciously fashions herself into a woman. So she is very much aware of the deteriorating conditions of the ghetto. She is terrified of the relocation to the closed ghetto. So she says that she wants to take her mind off what was happening outside, she says. And it is a really striking dynamic. I'm not going to read this whole entry because it's several pages. But she starts with this description of an encounter with a German. Something has broken in me. When I pass by a German, everything shrinks in me. I don't know whether it is out of fear or hatred. And then in the same sentence, literally, she says, I think, or like the sentence after, I think my womanhood has awoken in me. That means yesterday when I was taking a bath and the water stroked my body, I longed for someone's hands to stroke me. I have never had such sensations until now. And then immediately after this passage, she moves on to describe a retrospective recollection of the most brutal action in Będzin at the Hakoah Stadium in August 1942, And she describes it in halting prose, and she actually managed to escape, so it was quite dramatic. But then immediately after, she goes back to talk about, she calls it Everyday Matters, and it's again a vignette about Janek wanting to kiss her. So you can say it's kind of maybe inappropriate. It's like endearingly girlish, right? You have these ordinary dramas of adolescence amidst these horrors of the ghetto, right? Which, however, are very important to listen to and to read. And I'm just quoting from a Holocaust, literalist, Polish literary scholar, Justyna Kowalska-Leder, and she says that it is precisely these accounts of these adolescent, adventures, so to speak, that force us to confront and revise this ubiquitously tragic vision of Jewish lives during the Holocaust, because they were also full of, someone's longing for a first kiss. I will skip Renia, unfortunately. Laskier was really well educated. Her Polish was beautiful, cultivated. Yiddish was the language of the majority of Benjin's Jews, but there are only 2 words in Yiddish or of Yiddish origin that appear in the manuscript of the diary, but not in the Polish language publication. They were kind of excised right there. I was Schonde and Schluss, right, those 2. So in the later collections, the witnesses who knew Laskier in Benjin complimented her on her beautiful Polish. And one of them comments, and that's a survivor living in Israel, he says that Laskier's flawless command of Polish was proof of her high intellectual level, right? Which betrays post-war attitudes toward the Yiddish language. And everyone comments on Laskier's beautiful looks. I quote, tall, slim, with beautiful eyes and hair. A beautiful girl from another witness. And according to the testimony of Zofia Mintz, who was Laskier's bunkmate in Auschwitz-Birkenau, she says, Rutka Laskier was so beautiful that she even drew Mengele's attention. So before the relocation to Kamionki, I'm now going to talk about the history of the diary very quickly. She hid her diary in the staircase of the house in which the family was living, and she entrusted the location of the diary to her Polish friend Stanisława Sapińska. She was the daughter of the house owner. And Sapińska retrieved the diary after the war, and she held onto it for 60 years. And then she gave it to Adam Szydłowski, who was a self-appointed chronicler of Jewish life in Benjin, and he decided to take it to Yad Vashem. He explained that he presumably acted on Rutka's wish to return to the motherland, which she had not a chance to reach. And he also initiated the first Polish language edition of Laskier's Pamiętnik. It was launched at a ceremony in Benjin in 2006. These are very, very interesting editions. The Polish version includes notes on the history of the ghetto, Laskier's family life, and an elaborate visual narrative. There are facsimiles of all the diary pages, and also drawings by Ella Lieberman-Schieber, also a former resident of the ghetto, educational notes. There is this enormous meta-commentary that subsumes the diary itself. And then in 2008, Rutka's notebook appears from Yad Vashem. I didn't see any obvious omissions in the English translation, but the meta-commentary is just as enormous, but it's very different. And among others, what's added in the Yad Vashem English edition are photographs from the Holocaust. And the one that I found striking was a photograph a photograph of the crematoria in Auschwitz with the caption, and that was Rutka's fate. So if you think about a diary as this open form that remains in this dynamic relation with the author and does not end, it is truly open-ended, then you can see something like this Auschwitz photograph as having this function of closing the diary's open-ended narrative arc, inscribing the diary into this well-known chronology of Holocaust history. This iconic image of the crematorium separates it from the space and time in it was created, from its unique ecology of witnessing. And the covers of both Polish and English editions, as you can see, feature a stylized ID photo of Laskier, which was then overabundantly reproduced in various media, lending this portrait an aura of fetishistic fascination. Laskier is dubbed the Polish Anne Frank. She's showcased in a BBC documentary, a musical, a novel entitled Rutka by a Polish writer, Zbigniew Białas. There is a docudrama, Rutka Laskier, and numerous exhibits at different educational centers in North America. So she's turned into a global cultural phenomenon. And she even lent her name to a Czech post-hardcore music band, Rutka Laskier. So she becomes a pop star. And in the meantime, in Poland, the reception of the diary is marred by a criminal case against Andrzej Szydłowski for taking the library out of Poland in violation of the Polish Heritage Act. So both versions of the diary, both English and Polish, were published amidst Poland's reckoning with its wartime past. So it is 2006, 2007, 2008. And that is following Jan Tomasz Gross's publication of the book Neighbors in the year 2000 about the pogrom of Jedwabne's Jews by the Polish neighbors. And the English language edition of Gross's Fear, Anti-Semitism in Poland After Auschwitz appears in the same year as the Polish publication of Pamiętnik. Now, in contrast, I would even say in response to these acrimonies, both international and in Poland, in the introduction to Pamiętnik, Stanisława Sapińska, who founded or preserved it, is quoted as saying, there were no barriers between us based on religion. The Roma, Jews, Poles, we were raised together, we played together, no animosity. And this is corroborated by a Jewish survivor, Lindka Gold, who was Laskier's former classmate. And Lindka says, there were no divisions between Poles and Jews. With my cousin, I went to church to bless the eggs, and there were Christmas trees in Jewish homes. So in this climate of international backlash regarding Polish complicity during the Holocaust, the story of the diary's publication, which highlights the friendship between Laskier and Sapińska and these eyewitness testimonies that focus on neighborly relations between Poles and Jews in Będzin, made Rutka's diary an exemplary, if flawed, vehicle of cultural diplomacy. And I have one more, if you can bear with me, and that's Molly Applebaum, who, unlike Sierakowiak, Lipschitz, and Laskier, survived the Holocaust. Her diary, which she wrote between 42 and 45, was discovered by Jan Grabowski, a Polish Jewish scholar, a professor at the University of Ottawa, when it was given to him by Molly's grandson, a student in one of his classes. And Grabowski first published the diary in Poland in 2016 in the volume Dobrze jest posiadać dom pod ziemią, which means something like it is good to have a home underground, the experiences of women who survived the Holocaust in the area of Dąbrowa Tarnowska. Now, Grabowski is known as the author of Hunt for the Jews, Betrayal and Murder of German-occupied Poland, which first appeared in Polish in 2011, and he accuses the Poles of complicity in the murder of Polish Jews. The English language translation of the diary was published in 2017 by the Azrieli Foundation, together with a memoir written more than 5 decades later in the volume Buried Words. Let me see, not yet, sorry. So while the Polish title of the collection, It's Good to Have a Home Underground, draws attention to the survival of young Jewish women with the help of Polish neighbors, The English title, Buried Words, emphasizes the rescue of her diary from oblivion. And in the introduction to Buried Words, Grabowski explains that his research for Hunt for the Jews focused on this region of Dąbrowa Tarnowska, where Applebaum was hiding. So Grabowski's interest in publishing the diary was related to these divisive, acrimonious published debates in Poland about Polish rescuers, whom he calls unrighteous righteous, as was likely the case with most of the diary's Polish readers. And again, like Lipshitz's, Applebaum's diary was published shortly before the Holocaust law was introduced in Poland. So Polish political contexts, including especially this contentious issue of Polish assistance to the Jews during the wars, that was a factor, but it was of little interest in North America, mostly speaking. And for North American scholars, Applebaum's diary was interesting in relation to the growing interest in gender and sexuality in Holocaust studies. Applebaum was 12 when she started writing her diary in March 1942 in the ghetto of Dąbrowa Górnicza. And then she went on to be hidden on a farm by Polish Gentiles, Wiktor Wójcik and his sister Emilia Kulaga, where she continued to write the diary, most confined in a box underground. And in her diary, she candidly describes sexual relations between her older cousin and herself and their much older May provider. And it is a unique document in this respect. And both in the diary and in her 2018 oral interview for the Azrieli Foundation, Applebaum referred to sexual encounters with Victor as a way to relieve the boredom of the prolonged confinement, rather than as a form of coercion. North American feminist interpreters of Applebaum's diary, however, have emphasized the young woman's sexual agency and bodily autonomy under conditions of utter deprivation and powerlessness, and cautioned against interpreting the text through the lens of contemporary conceptions of what constitutes sexual violence, consent, and so forth. So read it within a complex dynamic of sexual barter. Similarly to last year, young Applebaum's command of the Polish language was impressive, as was her erudition in Polish literature. But she is 12 years old, and her initial entries, they betray her young age in various ways. Of course, it disappears in translation, but what is more interesting is that when she is in hiding, her language changes, very much so. And it becomes inflected, this beautiful literary Polish begins to kind of descend into the peasant dialect. And it becomes inflected with references to Christianity. And just one example, that's an entry, June 25, 1944. She is pleading for her life with her rescuer. You are our God on earth, our benefactor and savior. You still show us such mercy, acting entirely according to Christ's principles, which oblige one to save his neighbor in need, and so forth. So again, the English translation smoothes out these changes. You don't hear that it's a very different linguistic register, but it is in these linguistic slips and shifts that this is what bears witness to Applebaum's coming of age, to her transformation into young woman, whose circumstances disabused her of childhood dreams and literary aspirations. And it is also in this changing language that the growing intimacy with Victor is inscribed. So you could say that the changes in the language of the diary is so firmly anchored in the particularities of Applebaum's social and gendered coordinates and the alterations in these coordinates. But that's the specificity that disappears in translation, as does the historical or historically charged topography of the place where she was hiding. So maybe just some examples. She dedicates a significant portion of the diary to pleading with Victor for their lives. And what interests me a lot is the names that they called Wójcik. So first, they call him Wójcio, which is a kind of play on words on his name, Wójcik, but also wujcio is the diminutive of uncle in Polish. And it's also ironic, and that ironic tone probably indicates that Applebaum had a sense of the differences in social standing. And then his second nickname is Hunsfot, which is translated as rascal in English. But in Polish, Hunsfot is an archaic word. So it's very playful, but it appears in the episodes when Wójcik refuses to feed them, or he threatens to turn them out. So perhaps this humor and linguistic distance reflect Applebaum's belief that maybe language will have some agential power, so she can plead with Wójcik to save the lives. And the last word that they use is churuniu. And then different versions like churuniu, czureczku, czureńku. So this is a play on the diminutive of the Polish word córeczka, córuniu, in the vocative grammatical case. However, to the Polish ear, it has a distinctly sexual charge. It has some words that I can't even pronounce. But, you know, they are dirty words in Polish. So again, the name that they call him carries the charge. So again, that unfortunately is lost in translation. And then she invents this word lutanie, which I don't think exists or ever existed in Polish, for sex. But that again occludes the fact that she perhaps lacked the maturity and gender-specific coordinates to process her sexual relations with Wójcik. And just the last quote before I move to my conclusions finally. Her unwillingly acquired sexual knowledge and this matter-of-factness with which she describes these relations, her sexual relations with Wójcik, are very different to her earlier expressions of her love for Sabina, Bineczka, her older friend. And in her diary, she refers to that love as lesbian love. And she says, if only you knew, Bineczka, how much I love you, if only you knew, but you do not and shall never know. And if you look at the manuscript, and you can, if you go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, you will notice that she misspells the word lesbiska. She starts lesbiska instead of lesbiska, which probably indicates that the word was rather new to her. And the expressions in Polish that she uses are like truly suffused with this erotic sensibility. The translation draws on a more conventional vocabulary, how you would address a female friend. So perhaps this subdued translation is partly the reason why Melania's weird desire, which also plays out in her relation with her older cousin, was not initially written about or noted by North American scholars and readers. However, and now there are exceptions, there are two I could quote, but it was this forbidden homoerotic longing that first encouraged Melania or Applebaum to start writing, keeping her diary. She said, I have to write because there is this thing that I'm hiding at the bottom of my still childish heart that I can entrust this diary, but no one else. So as we can gather from the later memoir, Applebaum's dream to become a writer was crushed when, after the war, she was swept into the day-to-day mundanities of the DP camp, immigration to Canada, learning a new language. Her love of writing and her mother tongue became casualties of that history. Even her beautiful, I think, melodious Polish name, Melania, became Molly. And Polish was not spoken in Applebaum's Canadian home, so the main connection she maintained with the Polish language was through correspondence with the children, later also grandchildren of her rescuers. So this finally leads me to my conclusions. So I hope I have drawn attention to the differences in historical, discursive, and gendered locations occupied by the original texts of the diaries and their English translations. And I wanted to reflect on the role of translation in the politics of Holocaust memory on both sides of the Atlantic. This is somewhat general, but I find that English language translations of youth Holocaust diaries written in Polish favor a redemptive narrative that provides this sense of closure, the framework dictated by the exigencies of Holocaust education that targets youngest audiences. It also kind of leans into a popular Holocaust trope of the innocent child, which de-emphasizes the writer's sexuality and moral agency. This is just a cover of one of the diaries by Clara Kramer, who was between the ages of 15 and 18 when she was writing her diary in the bunker in Żółkiew. But that's the cover of the diary in the English translation that shows a girl that's perhaps 5 years old and so forth. So Polish scholars, on the other hand, emphasize local context and the fidelity to the manuscript, decrying the errors and omissions in the English translations, as I have done here. But while identifying the distortions in the translated text is a matter of scholarly integrity, it also reflects the desire to reclaim the Polish language text from their appropriation in English, the hegemonic language of Holocaust memorialization, whose simplified often renditions have displaced these unique documents from the Polish cultural and geographical contexts. The translatory wars thus reveal the role of translation in relocating the diaries from Poland to the sites where supposedly they have received proper recognition, commemoration, and care at the Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Museum in DC. So within the framework of a popular North American narrative, the four diaries, of which only 2 notebooks of Sierakowiak's diary reside in Poland today, have been rescued from the landscape of death in Poland, in which Jewish life today is but a specter of the vanished world, and they were given a posthumous life in North America and Israel. I'm reading it with a critical lens. So perhaps to conclude, it is not by chance that the so-called post-colonial turn in Holocaust studies has coincided with the emerging attention to the role of translation. The trials and tribulations of translating Holocaust diaries by young Jewish writers into English illuminate the Western-centric dynamics of the canon of Holocaust literature and the Polish scholars' resistance to English language's cultural supremacy. And I will quote from a colleague, Aleksandra Szczepan, who in a paper, Terra Incognita, Othering East Central Europe in Holocaust Studies, examines this othering, orientalizing, and sometimes even colonial imagery in of Eastern and Central Europe in Holocaust scholarship, noting the disjunction between the moralizing Western gaze and the lived experience and local memory of these spaces. So I just want to propose that what I call it a translatory turn in Holocaust studies that I believe is taking place now. And the translatory turn calls for translations that I would call decolonial, emplaced, intersectional, and fundamentally relational. That is, they account for linguistic power structures during the Holocaust and its aftermath, and in the context of contemporary practices of commemoration. They convey the traces of the sites of the text production, and they illuminate the way in which the transposition of those locations by means of translation has shaped memorial paradigms. They consider the intertwined axes of the writer's identities when the texts are relocated to different cultural environments. And these translations, which for the most part are translations yet to come, they also disclose the networks of hands that have crafted the text on their journeys toward becoming works of Holocaust literature. And they might even become with the effective modality of friendship, as was the case with the discovery of the translation of Rivka Lipshitz's diary, replacing these adversarial modes that we saw with translations of Sierakowiak and Laskier. So I would however, argue that the blueprint for Holocaust studies translatory turn was present already in the text by precocious young writers such as Dawid Sierakowiak and Rywka Lipszyc. They were astutely aware of linguistic power relations in the ghetto. Or as in the case of Lasker and Applebaum, they were code switching in the game for life, and they paved the way, perhaps, even if unbeknownst to themselves, for the Diaries' translatory peregrinations in the global landscape of Holocaust remembrance. I will conclude with Walter Benjamin, who in his essay, The Task of the Translator, argues that the task of the translator is to illuminate the horizon of complementarity and kinship between languages. A translator worthy of the name, Benjamin writes, is to release in his own language that pure language which is under the spell of another, to liberate the language imprisoned in a work in his recreation of the work. And this means that translation holds a unique potential to foster intercultural forms of co-witnessing, grounded in shared responsibilities to transmit the narratives of the past between different national and linguistic locations, attuned to the exigencies of multidirectionally oriented memorial contexts. Thank you.